Hey, it's Chris with Wetbox. We've been getting some questions. How can a system possibly be 4 times better in this car than this other leading brand, sort of thing? And of course, we're over 700 reviews at this point, and they're not just like, hey, I like my stereo, but they go into great detail about the other brands that a lot of them have removed. So the big question is, how is it imaginable that a $5,500 stereo can be destroyed by a $5,500 stereo of ours? How can that happen? So I think the best way to explain it, we have it all in writing, but I think the best way might be to go over it in tiers, kind of explain it in tiers. So first of all, like the worst tier, for example, is what you see like in a Defender, where people mount a speaker and a plate. It's mounted in a plate. And there is no enclosure. There's no capturing the back side of the speaker. The problem with that is sound from the front and the back of the speaker are never supposed to reach each other. It completely cancels all the low-end frequencies. It becomes tinny, output drops. This represents kind of the worst case scenario. Thankfully, you don't see too much of this. Another example, kind of the next step up from that, is a mounting plate that kind of quasi-seats up against a door. The Maverick R, for example, if you go on Amazon, there's enclosures for the doors. The 6.5, it's not an enclosure. It's actually just a plate. Doesn't seal around. We did a video with this speaker, in fact, where we show in an enclosure just barely cracking it, night and day difference. You can hear the sound changes immediately. So it's important to understand that that complete seal makes a difference. So then the next step up is into enclosures. So this represents the kind of the tier everybody else is at. So this is where typically somebody will take a 6.5 and they'll put it in an enclosure that is like a glorified milk jug, tiny. So this car is a Pro R. If you look at our Pro R enclosure for this same car, it's this big. You could put the volume, 4 times the volume of this in our enclosure. And volume is important as far as airspace, but the main issue you have is it's a 6.5 and the flimsy nature of these enclosures. But this is pretty much where everybody else stops. The sub enclosures are made this way. They're small, low airspace, 10-inch driver, 6.5s. So that represents pretty much anything else you're probably going to compare us to. So here's where we take the giant leap. So right off the bat, 8-inch driver versus 6.5s. The only time we use a 6.5 is reflecting off of a windshield because of the gain you get from that reflection, but otherwise 8s all day, every day. An 8 has twice the surface area of a 6.5, and it's not just the surface area that's important. You could say, well, 2 6.5s have the same surface area as an 8, but if you think about it, 2 4s up against a 6.5 don't sound anything like a 6.5. The key is the total circumference, being able to capture that warm tone, the mid-bass, full sound. This is where these tweeters really start to balance out. What works in a car where you have cabin gain and steel and glass of a regular automobile, 6.5s are okay there, but in an open air boat, side by side, 2 different worlds of performance. And that's the speaker itself. And I'm talking about giving the benefit of the doubt that in any of this stuff, the speaker itself is of quality. But it's really the enclosures and the environments that make the difference from there. So then the next step up from there is not only is it an 8, it's an 8 in our rigid enclosures. If you tap our enclosures, it sounds like 3/4 inch MDF. We make sub boxes out of 3/4 inch MDF anytime you possibly can because you don't want to have box flex. The rigidity of that enclosure is super important. That again is why you have a problem here. So very, very rigid and stiff enclosures. But the important part, so this is a Maverick R door, for example, is the airspace that you get behind the speaker, the volume nature of this. To give you the best idea here, this is a top brand pod enclosure. So we know what these do on the back of a boat. We've heard them, even though this speaker is low sensitivity, and actually the speaker that goes in this is not loud at all. But just in general, the structure of a pod, we know what it can do when you have the airspace to support a speaker, and this one's on the larger side. The airspace between these 2 enclosures are almost identical. So you have the output in your door, one position, you got another position right under it, equivalent to the airspace of a pod that you put on the back of your vehicle. So when you're looking at what a door can do in general, you've got to understand these are two totally different worlds than kind of what is normal. And that's just in one position. You create a system, where you have multiple 8s in the vehicle, night and day difference. So that same properties, go over into subwoofers as well. For example, on the Maverick R, this represents, worst case scenario. It's not that off from some of the bad ones, but so there's people on Amazon willing to create a product and sell it that absolutely defies all reason in a sub enclosure. Excuse me. First of all, it's not an enclosure, cheap plastic. And a lot of people are 3D printing plastic enclosures nowadays. That's not a rigid enclosure. But this isn't even an enclosure at all. It doesn't seal. Really, the functional airspace for the 10-inch sub that you would put in here is this pocket. Absolutely impossible. Non-function, does not work, period. But yet, unfortunately, there's going to be a lot of people that buy this on Amazon thinking, hey, here's my sub enclosure, for my Maverick R. So then you look at the difference of your typical 10-inch enclosure is going to be a little more like this as far as rigidity goes. In subs, that's where that rigidity really comes into play, is super important. So if you look at ours, it's heavy. This is our unit. So this is a Maverick R. This goes in the same car as that same thing I just showed you, in the same position. If you look at the size of this, the amount of airspace, the amount of structures that are present, the point of this whole thing is it captures every single ounce of airspace. So one, you're in an enclosure, super rigid, versus this stuff. So your normal Maverick R setup is going to be a 10 and something like this. So you're not a 10. In this case, you're a 12. You have well over 2 times the airspace. In certain vehicles, we're 3 and 4 times the airspace. But in this case, you've got the 12, and then you have a square 12. So a square sub has over 20% more surface area than a round sub. So you're pushing the surface area of almost a 14-inch sub versus a 10. And then, of course, you have the supporting airspace behind it. So night and day difference. This is in a Maverick R. You've got the doors that we just showed you. You're talking a whole different level of sound. That's why we get concert sound over and over again. Some guys call the other stuff toys in comparison, sound bars in comparison. I mean, $5,000-$6,000 systems. Our customers that have actually owned it, heard it, installed it, call those $6,000 systems toys, sound bars. There's a reason for it. All this stuff combines on itself, and just unless you've heard it, you can't comprehend if this is your previous level of understanding of the market. Same thing here. These we made originally for boats. We use them on side-by-sides as well. These pods on their own project up to 3/4 of a mile. That's where we stopped recording. Honestly, I think they'll do about a mile. 3 drivers. The whole point of them wasn't to be loud, and it wasn't to project 3/4 of a mile. It was to be able to put them in boats, kind of center mass, have a downfire speaker, front and back firing, whereas you walk through the boat from front to back, you have balanced sound all the way through. The fact that they push 130 dB, that's a jet taking off from an aircraft carrier with its afterburners on, and that we have them on video over 130 dB, at over 3/4 of a mile, was just kind of a bonus. What we were after was balanced sound, getting the sound stage of a boat up and out, and getting proper projection. Part of the reason we went with 6x9s, why do I do 6x9s? Back in the market, my first vehicle, 82 Camaro, I was lucky enough to have one of the few cars that had 6x9s in them. Everybody else had 6.5s. No matter what those guys did, no matter how much money they spent on the most advanced 6.5 they could get, they couldn't touch even the inexpensive pair of 6x9s that I had in my Camaro. It's back to that speaker driver thing. And today, everybody sees 8-inch full-range speakers, but back then they didn't exist. This was your only full-range speaker. So we've had people say, oh, well, 6x9s are designed for infinite baffle. They were designed for cars. First of all, that design has shifted on 6x9s. Back then, they were made to be a subwoofer and a full-range speaker in one. So in a Camaro, it was your sub and it was your speaker. Nowadays, they're designed just like any other 8-inch driver. They are designed for infinite baffle, but of course, all of the drivers from all of the brands are comfortable in enclosures as well. So when we designed this, the question was, would these remain full sounding, having 3 of them in the enclosure? We've tested with this pod, for example, that this pod has basically half the airspace that this pod has. So the speakers themselves, because this speaker was much larger, displacing more air, the actual air that each speaker uses is equivalent between these two. So you get 3 speakers with the same amount of air that this speaker functions with. So, the goal was to see, would they be full sounding? And the bottom line is they've absolutely blown us away on what they can do. We have testimonial videos where customers have spent $5,000 on 2 8/8s, and we put these up against them in one single direction where you're basing just the output level off these drivers pointing at you. We're 4 times the volume. And that's because 6x9s can be very efficient. For example, this over here is a 90 efficiency, 92. Some people will say, well, horns, they're louder because they're horns. We get almost the same output out of Polk tweeters. They're actually 93 dB, so they're actually higher than this. So there's a lot of people, when it comes to 6x9s, they don't understand it. I should say the top tier is once you get all this stuff right, like we talked about, once all this is correct, the top and final tier, which I doubt anybody goes into, is you've got the enclosure that works, what a 6x9 does, is we then bought 90 pair of 6x9s to find out, regardless of brand, what was the best of the best. I can't imagine any other manufacturer's probably ever done it. I did it back in the early 90s, and I did it again now that the 6x9s have changed. And of course that changed. Back in the day, it was Fosgate, Kicker, JL, all the top names, and I tested everybody, and nobody would be caught dead with Pioneer speakers back then. And the Pioneer destroyed everything. It wasn't even close. The only thing you would run Pioneer back then was the head units. So put them up against Infinity Kappas and a reasonably priced Pioneer 4-way. It was in a whole different universe than speakers 4 times the price. And that also happens today. So we test, we have people ask, can I get this unloaded? The answer is no, for multiple reasons. One, this is sealed, extra sealant. I know it's mounted, I know it's waterproof, I know, more importantly, how it performs. My name's on it. I want to know what this does out in the marketplace. An alternate sub might not fit, might not perform half as well. I know what this does. I bought 90 pair of 6x9s to test for this. I want to know that they're in my product. Some people don't understand that, but the whole thing for us is that you get the best of the best. We've spent the time, we've spent the money, and we sell only loaded enclosures for that reason. So a lot of information there, but I hope it kind of makes sense to you. And we now make parts for 9 vehicles. This is just getting ready to go market it out to the marine market for the first time. Something else I should show you here, the cool thing about these enclosures is you can walk under them. So this can either directly mount to your canopy, or if you have a bar system, the bar goes through the pod. So instead of an 8-inch or a 9-inch with bracket that hangs down 11 inches total, you're at 6 inches here. So on a fishing boat or canopy boat, you can walk under these and have literally concert sound out of these 2 pods. And when you get a chance, check out the distance videos on this showing that we drive the distance, over 3/4 of a mile. You can't even see them, but you can hear every word. Check that out. But yeah, lots of fun stuff here, and we're always looking for suggestions for the next car. If you have any ideas, let us know, and appreciate you checking it out.